I'm Walt Hibner. I'm with Vectren. I'm the social committee chair of the I-7075 board, which means I have the best job on the board. I just to go out, try out places, make sure they're okay for the association to attend, and we go from there. Mitch mentioned the 30th anniversary of the association, and that's kind of a big deal. So we are going to be planning, or we have been planning, we're waiting for the proper venue to come into play for a 30th year anniversary celebration. So be on the lookout for that. We don't have any details yet. It'll be a good time. There's probably going to be craft beer involved, so we'll take care of that. So you are very fortunate to have this group. I watched the Miller Valentine board meeting that was in here earlier. They did a great job. Dave did a heck of a job. It was very structured, very corporate. I thought it was very well done. Well, this is not going to be anything like that. We're going to be much more freewheeling, organic, kind of that whole kind of gritty downtown flavor and atmosphere for this event, or for this part of the event. So downtown development, you know, I can tell you, I kind of grew up here most of my life, all but about 4 years. Went to this college before this building was even here. Used to hang out at the arcade. Our instructors, our architectural drafting teachers sent us down there to do architectural scavenger hunts. You know, there's 16 turkeys around the rotunda of the arcade. And that was one of the questions I had to get for that test I had to take. But, you know, back then, or even as early as maybe 5 to 10 years ago, you could count the number of projects on a hand, and you didn't even need your thumb or your little finger. Now we have to have a database, and that database gets updated weekly. I mean, think about all the things you've seen come along. It's just phenomenal how much redevelopment there's been, how much interest there's been. And it's interesting, too, the 4 gentlemen we have speaking today, you know, a couple of them have been around a while, but you know, you think about those that really tried to do developments in the past and really try to make it work downtown. And you had some architects that were very passionate, and you had some really risk-adverse developers that were willing to get in and try to make something happen. Well, things have really changed drastically in the last 3 to 5 years. One of the big things is the interest in development. So I was at the housing tour on Saturday. You know, I talked to Charlie Sims an hour into it. He goes, yeah, I think we've had about 100 people come through. And interesting mix of people, a lot of empty nesters. I found out at that event, went to one of the other housing developments, and they had a Gossiger, made in Dayton, robot that you would reach over and pull out a red Solo cup, put it down. You would tell it whether you wanted 10-ton or Trotwood lager. It would then pick your cup up, go over to the tap, set it down, pull the tap, fill up the cup, put it back. And I thought, you know, I spent all those years getting ready for college by bartending. And I thought that was always going to be a fallback career if I ever had to have it. And now I've been replaced by the robot from Gossiger. So there's a lot of neat things going on. And I think the city and everyone else who's been involved, and these guys are a big piece of it, but the positioning of the assets downtown, the interest, the timing couldn't be any better for all the things we've got going on. So without any further ado, I'm not going to read their bios. They're all very impressive. They're in this fine document you received when you came in. But what we're going to do, to be a little more freewheeling, I'm going to introduce the 4 of them, and then they're going to come up here one by one, run through their PowerPoints, because this will be a very visual presentation by all 3 of them. Then we're going to sit them down here, and you're going to ask them very hard questions. So these gentlemen down here can write really good articles this afternoon, and you can see them on the internet. So that's how we're going to work. So the first gentleman we have is Scott Murphy. Scott's the Vice President of Economic Development for the Downtown Dayton Partnership. After Scott will be John Gower, and John's a legend here and one of the visionaries that's been around and seen the downtown environment change so drastically over the years in a lot of different directions. And John is with the Urban Design Director of Citywide, so he's tight with the whole citywide development and how they've been around quite a while. Next gentleman will be Scott Gibson. Scott's the CEO of the Elway Group. The fire block, you may hear a little more about that. And then we brought in Dave Williams, who's done his share of loft building in downtown Dayton and is currently the Vice President of Urban Development with Miller Valentine, and he'll be talking about the arcade. So with that, I turn it over to Scott.
All right, so we wanted to do, you're going to get sort of 30,000-foot level from me in terms of just overall downtown trends and some of the background, I think, that are driving some of the positive momentum so far. And then these guys are going to get a little bit more detail on respective projects, and I know John's going to talk some about the development area that we call the 9. So certainly a broad team that you're getting a sense of that team by the folks you're hearing from today, organizations that are represented here on this first slide, but much, much broader than just these organizations that are involved in downtown development. It's really a deep team of both private and public sector partners. So I want to start out with a little bit of talking about sort of our numbers. You hear us talk a lot about the greater downtown. So when we talk about that geography, which is roughly UD on the south and our inner ring historic neighborhoods as you move around the central business district, but it's a geography that has more than 25,000 residents, really just shy of about 30,000 residents. About 2,500 of those residents are in the core of downtown. More than 45,000 workers in that geography, about 21,000 in the central business district. It is a geography that has more than 40,000 students, the lion's share of those students between Sinclair and the University of Dayton. And then more than 7 million visitors a year coming to downtown attractions and performances and dining and entertainment. So I used to work at Wright-Patt. So we always talk about the economic impact of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base on this region. Downtown rivals Wright-Patt in terms of its annual impact economically for the Miami Valley. So in terms of what's happening, you know, about 7 to 8 years ago, the community came together sort of in the midst of really tough economic times, not just for the region, but for across the country, and around this idea that the future of the region was interlinked with the future of the core, that for us to have a strong region, that we really needed to have a strong downtown, and that downtown has this outsized economic impact in terms of attracting talent and just really creating identity for our community. And it's really led to, I think, some significant investment and momentum. We're tracking more than $600 million in projects completed. That doesn't even include I-70 or I-75. That is another $500 million in projects. And in the pipeline, I think, is what's really exciting is more than $600 million in the pipeline. And that pipeline of projects in the last 2 years has roughly tripled. So this idea that investment begets investment is really starting to get traction for our downtown community. And I think what's particularly exciting for us, I mean, the exciting investments and the projects that you think on the sort of the periphery of the greater downtown have really created some momentum for the core, but the figure here in the upper left is the investments in specifically in the central business district in the core of downtown. And we're really starting to get some traction into some large projects over this last year, this year, and next year, roughly about $300 million in projects in the core. And then I think there's this general sense of optimism about what's happening in our downtown across the region. But each year we ask our business owners, we do a survey of our business owners. We have roughly about 800 employers in the core of downtown. More than half take this survey, and we've been asking this right direction, wrong direction question now for a few years, and we're consistently seeing it getting higher and higher, and now 9 out of 10 downtown business owners saying that we're heading in the right direction for downtown. So it's encouraging to know that our business owners are really seeing the traction that downtown is getting. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, Walt talked about timing. And there are some mega trends that have been happening across the country that are much, much bigger than what's happening in Dayton, Ohio. This first part of this is this urban revitalization trend. And it really started with the big downtowns the Manhattans, the Chicagos, and then it started to be felt in sort of mid-sized cities like Pittsburgh and Cincinnati and Cleveland, and is now really starting to hit Dayton-sized cities in a very real way. And it's all being led by this desire for urban living. I know millennials are talked about a lot, but it is something I think that is shared much broader than that age demographic. This desire for close proximity to work, to entertainment, this idea that walkability is just a really important part of commercial real estate, and it's having a major impact in commercial real estate across the country. The figure in the lower right, there's several different studies that are tracking things like this, but the fact that in urban areas, or walkable urban areas, are now commanding commercial rent premiums over the surrounding suburbs. Now, this is certainly not where we're at least on the commercial side for downtown Dayton, but it certainly is something we're starting to feel on the residential side in terms of rent pressures pushing up because of this desire for urban living in the core. Another piece of this is the importance of urban revitalization tools that are fundamentally creating market in these urban areas. And in terms of what's listed on this slide, I don't think there's any two that are more important than the state and federal historic tax credits. You're going to hear more about projects that are utilizing those and are really difference makers in whether those projects are even viable in the first place. Between the two credits combined, once you sell the credits, leveraging 35 to 37, 38% equity in these projects that are just really big pieces of these capital stacks. Tool that's been put in place, Property Assessed Clean Energy, the PACE program, about 2 years ago, enables building owners to make energy improvements to their building, and then pay them back through an assessment on their property taxes. It's playing a role in not only just existing buildings, but also is playing a role in capital stacks like the Delco Lofts that'll be open here in a couple months. New market tax credits, Dave's going to talk about the arcade. They are absolutely critical for that project and have played a role in past downtown projects. More and more, I think you're going to start to see revolving loan funds play a role in what's happening downtown, either targeted at office space users or first floor activation, sort of pots of money that are there to enable the build out of these projects. And then finally, I think tax increment financing that has played a role in some projects in the periphery of downtown. I think you're going to start to see that play an even greater role. I don't think I can stress more to this audience how important these tools are into what's happening downtown. I think if we were to lose any of these pieces, it would really have a pretty drastic impact on the momentum that we've had so far. About a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, there was some concern about the state historic tax credit program. I feel like that has sort of stabilized now. Right now, our concern is what's going to happen at the federal level for the historic tax credit program and also new markets. Again, these are really important pieces of what's happening, not just in downtown Dayton, but in downtowns across the country and even in smaller urban areas like the Xenias, the Springfields, the Pickwas. These play an important role, again, in creating market for these center cities. The last sort of big trend I'll talk to, and Dave is going to get more into the manifestation of this with the arcade, but is this rise of innovation districts. So about 3 years ago, the Brookings Institute wrote a report, and it really was an observation about how innovation, research and development, commercialization was starting to cluster around cities that traditionally had been in these sort of isolated suburban office parks, but are starting to migrate downtown, and how the sort of fundamental elements of a city sort of support this innovation ecosystem. This idea that you can bump into business connections, and then the density of these places really help support this entrepreneurial energy. And this is something that is really starting to get traction for Dayton now. We're going to go later this afternoon. AFRL is opening an office downtown at 444 East 2nd. And this idea of needing to be part and really close proximity to these startup ecosystem partners is what's driving for them to locate downtown. It's what's driving the vision behind the arcade, and it's really becoming a very big piece of our downtown economy. So certainly housing has been a big piece of what's been happening down here. We're currently tracking about 1,350 units, market rate units, across the core of downtown, this area of Central Business District and Webster Station. About 250 of those units came on in the last 12 months. The biggest increment being the new apartments at Water Street, 215 new apartments. I know we've been talking about housing downtown for a number of years now, but it's important to recognize with those 215 units, that's more than we added in terms of volume in the last 6 or 7 years combined. So some really big projects starting to come online in the core, tracking 636 units that will come online over the next 18 months. So you think about 250 just opening, another 600-ish in the pipeline, and what's that going to do to downtown population? What's that going to do to purchase power for people downtown and our retail and restaurants? What's it going to do to 18-hour-a-day street traffic? So really going to add some vibrancy to the core. And you know, I think it's important to recognize what's driving this. Again, it's this desire for urban living. Walt talked about the housing tour. We had a ton of people come out and look at some of the new units this past Saturday. For, I think, 5 years now, we've had the tightest apartment market in the region, consistently around 97, 98%. And in just this last market study report, so I just mentioned the big influx of units we got downtown, particularly on the apartment side. Our vacancy went down. We grew the apartment market by about 25%, and our vacancy went down for the past year. So not only are these new units filling very quickly, for example, Jason, at Water Street, they filled it up within about 2 months of that being completed, but the existing housing stock is also staying full. So I'm going to just touch on some of the bigger development projects you're going to hear much more about, particularly the fire blocks and the arcade, and also the area called the 9. You know, I think it's important to emphasize, you know, there are some principles that are driving us to do what we're doing. This idea of density, the importance of density, the importance of creating an authentic sense of place, something that is uniquely Dayton. Of course, walkability, this idea that we need this vibrant sense of place. A vibrant first floor, active first floor storefronts, because we're not going to be walkable if first floor storefronts aren't active. You're just not going to want to make the walk in the first place. And then finally, multimodal. So ways to get around without a car, the sort of park once thought. So 3 projects right now that are underway. I already talked a little bit about Water Street, 215 new apartments that were constructed for the most part in 2016. Again, those filled up within about 2 months of them being completed. Another 54 have started construction on the eastern edge of that Water Street development. The new office building, 50,000 square foot office building that PNC anchors, is now 100% full. The Delco Lofts, 132 loft-style apartments right on Fifth Third Plaza that will be opening here in a couple months. If you got to tour that, I thought it was one of the most amazing apartment spaces I've seen so far downtown. And then it'll have Lock 27, their second location, on the first floor. And then within a couple months here, they'll be breaking ground in the new hotel, which is on the northeastern corner of Patterson and Monument. So just a lot of development activity in that quadrant of downtown. Of course, our new main library. Hopefully you got to check out their main event back in April. Just an amazing space, really transforming our libraries really across the region. But this sort of jewel in the entire library system will be opening here this coming August. And then where Walt got his beer from the Beer Bot at the Wheelhouse, 40 market rate apartments. This is on the eastern edge of the Oregon District. If you hear us talk about Oregon East, that's sort of the first investment in this Oregon East plan. 40 market rate apartments, and then Troll Pub under the bridge, which is a concept so the developer here is Wayland Ventures based out of Louisville. Troll Pub under the bridge is one of their tenants and one of their properties down in Louisville. They'll be opening a second location here in Dayton. John is going to talk about Levitt, so I really don't want to steal his thunder. All I will say is that this anchor investment in what is now Dave Hall Plaza, and this idea that this anchor investment will create market for this part of downtown, which is one of the more challenged areas of downtown from a vacancy perspective. I think the city deserves a ton of leadership, a ton of credit for their leadership in this idea, and in the projects you're going to hear about coming up, which are all around Leavitt. I'll talk more about Center City in a minute, but it really is creating development market for this part of downtown. And then, of course, the projects in the pipeline, Center City I'll touch on. So this was purchased about a year ago by a developer based out of Virginia. They have a lot of track record, a pretty deep track record in adaptive reuse and EB5-based investment, leveraging that program as part of their capital stack. They have put forward a plan for a little bit over 160 apartments in this property, and then active storefronts, retail restaurants on the first floor. This is right across the street from where the Leavitt Pavilion will be. Of course, CareSource, I'll talk more about that in a moment, but they continue to be just a huge economic driver for downtown, and you're going to hear about the arcade and fire blocks here coming up. All these projects that are in work, you think about what's shown here, what's shown on the previous slide, it's over 1 million square feet of currently vacant space that is being reactivated into mixed use, into residential, and you think about what that's going to do, not just to the activity of these buildings, but the activity of the storefronts for these properties and making some of these connections to different parts of downtown. From a business perspective, with the core, it for the last 4 or 5 years has really hovered in terms of around 21,000 jobs is where we've been. We've added the number of businesses downtown. We're seeing a lot of growth in small employers. I'll talk more about startups here in a moment. Some major corporate investments, of course, CareSource continues to be just a huge driver for 2,000 employees in the core across 4 buildings, and then their new building coming up here in a couple years. I'm sure you read the news about Taylor's move downtown, 500 employees in the core, which will be a big boost. And then a lot of small businesses, technology firms, creative services firms. Our economy is just really changing. A lot of startup activity. Things like Crafted and Cured or Table 33, a lot of new restaurants and a lot of new retail. Some really talented people. That's what's exciting about this. Really, really talented people that are starting businesses in the core, whether it be Bobby from Nana, who a former Air Force officer, started this business. He makes ice cream out of bananas, and he's in more than 30 grocery stores now across the Midwest, and he's just growing very rapidly. Or Kate Rivers from Twist and Twist Cupcakery, one of our pop-up shops that opened in St. Clair Lofts about 2 years ago. So just some really talented entrepreneurs starting businesses downtown, and something that we see as sort of fundamental to the growing and the emerging downtown economy. And this innovation corridor that seems to be, not only being linked programmatically, but more and more linked from a transportation perspective, linked from a infrastructure perspective. The fantastic institutions and organizations around the University of Dayton, now with the Karate Center being linked to the arcade and the Entrepreneur Center, those organizations have been working together programmatically for a couple years now. Now they're going to be in the same space with the Dayton Arcade. And then this idea that I've always, appreciated from the Wright Pat side, when I used to do a lot of work downtown as a volunteer, but this linkage between Wright Pat and downtown is really only 10 minutes away, and we're incredibly well positioned geographically, being able to not only link some of these university and institutional assets, but also the economic activity at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And wrapping up, of course, from an amenity side, there's more and more to do downtown. We talk a lot about our high-quality dining. We've consistently had the Dayton Business Journal does a survey of its readers every year. On their favorite restaurants, we've consistently had the top 6 or 7, or at least have 6 or 7 in the top 10. More than 50 restaurants within a 10-minute walk. 5 brew pubs, 1 distillery. There'll be a 6th brew pub opening up with Lock 27 here pretty soon. Our bike share program, 27 stations, 225 bikes throughout downtown, again providing this option for people to get around without a car. They're now over 70,000 trips. We had a cold opening for our river run a couple weeks ago, but just incredible recreational asset that we have now in our core. 2 whitewater features, one at Riverscape, one down by the Dayton Art Institute. This is really attracting a recreational community here, and whether you're a kayaker or not, it's still fun to bring your lunch out to Riverscape and watch these folks play in the water. We've always been recognized, I think, as a strong mid-sized city for our arts. Sort of the heart of that is in the core of downtown. numerous festivals. The Dragons are breaking their sellout record every night of the year. And then, new and unique stores, helping, again, make downtown a retail destination. We know we're not going to be the retail destination or center of retail that downtown was 30 years ago, but these new and local shops, the sort of buy local movement, the convergence with downtown has really benefited these local retailers that have opened over the last 4 or 5 years. So finally, it's for us, live, learn, work, and play. We're trying to fundamentally create this environment that's walkable, that's unique to this community, the ability to live a lifestyle that you really can't get anywhere else in the Miami Valley. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try and go quickly here. I wanted to share with you a conversation that we've been having here quietly, starting quietly 3 or 4 years ago, and laying the groundwork for some of the stuff that's emerging right now. Scott talked a little bit about Webster Station. A lot of what's happening in Webster Station today, the groundwork was laid 25 years ago, so there's no such thing as something happening overnight. So let me get into the 9 development strategy. So what is that? It's a strategic revitalization conversation that's focused on Dave Hall Plaza and the 8 blocks surrounding it. It's a working title that we're using to describe the particular emerging strategic development concept. It may end up being branded that. The design and development analysis really began quietly in 2013. And there is a lot of work underway, but there's still a lot more work yet to come. So I'm going to go back, take a look at 2013, 4 years ago, and we're going to look at 2 sides of the ledger here. What's going on, the emerging market atmospheric. Scott touched on a lot of these, and there's this ascending downtown housing market. A lot of that's focused east of the core, and I'd say east of Jefferson and Webster Station, Oregon. That area. In 2013, we had Charlie Sims at the table thinking about doing his first townhouse project. We had Crawford Hoying looking to expand beyond their work in the Columbus area and going to a couple of other second-tier Ohio cities, and Dayton was one of them, and deciding to come here and plant their stake in the ground with Water Street. The other item, Scott also touched on that, the market-driven expansion of the urban lifestyle amenities. In 2013, we were just beginning to see the expansion of the independent restaurants in Oregon. 6 years ago, we didn't have the first brew pub. Now we actually have a brew pub trail. There's been a lot of advance moving forward on active lifestyles, particularly with cycling and the work that's being done with River Run. And as Scott also mentioned, we've seen a lot of growth in startups and small businesses, both tech and social. And again, this has tended to be east, but a couple of things sprinkled in the downtown core. Now in 2013, this is on the challenge side. Describing the core here roughly is 4 blocks wide and 6 blocks long. So that would be St. Clair to Wilkinson Street, from the river down to the railroad. It's about roughly 6 million square feet of commercial space. And equivalency, that would be the equivalent of 12 Kettering towers. Half of that space in 2013 is in some form of vacancy. More than half of it was in some form of ultimately heading towards abandonment. A lot of the buildings at that time were tax delinquent, dark, people not taking care of them, not cleaning out roof drains, those kinds of things, people breaking into buildings. And we still have a little bit of that, but not nearly what we had in 2013. And Dave Williams, who was brought on board by Citywide at the request of the city here to really dig into this, and I think this was a really important pivot, came to the table because there was a lot of discussion at that time about, well, you really can't do anything with these, at least a 1.5 to 2 million square feet of these buildings, so you really just need to take them down. So Dave did some calculations, and to take down 5 of the buildings, just quickly, Arcade, Fidelity, 225 South Main, Center City, and the old Third National Bank building, $25 million. And then removing those buildings at a cost of $25 million, which would fall to the public side of the ledger because no one in the private side is really going to spend that money to demolish the buildings, we would be pitching somewhere between $45 to $60 million worth of historic tax credits into the landfill. So this was really, I think, a really important epiphany that a lot of folks had, because this was really taking it out of the emotional realm and really getting into a discussion about more of a clinical conversation about money. In 2013, we had little to no developer interest south of 3rd Street. We had a very tired Dave Hall Plaza. It was built in 1974. It's been here for over 50 years now, and it really has not been updated. So we have a tired Dave Hall Plaza, an unknown future convention market, and at that time, gaps in urban connectivity, and Scott also touched on this about the street vibrancy. So the city manager charge at that point in time forward to citywide was to find a path forward, do it very quietly, do it below the radar, to try and accelerate and support a growing market demand for downtown housing, and to attract adaptive reuse developers to really attack a lot of these vacant buildings that were headed down the path of abandonment. So going forward, there were aspirational principles and goals, and I would describe this really as a 3-legged stool, and we've touched a little bit on workforce, and I think all 4 of us are going to touch a little bit here on workforce, is really what you want to do is retain and attract and grow the best educated, creative, talented, flexible workforce you can possibly have. This is critically important to our legacy employers, to our established businesses, to the small businesses, and if we're thinking about the future here, we really have to think about the role for startups, again, which Scott touched on here. Second piece of that is you really need that to enhance and expand economic activity, and an investment is an indicator of that. Employment is an indicator of that. Business revenues generated are an indicator of that, as are new business openings. And linking that with the system of quality civic investments to leverage that economic activity, and that is as old as human civilization is to begin with. And you can go back as far as you want and start to see the beginning of the cities, and you'll see this linkage between important civic spaces and leveraging economic activity. In this approach for this particular strategy, we're applying the urban design development principles of placemaking, placeonomics, and parkonomics, designing for connectivity and vibrancy at the street level, because again, that's what you want to create as awesome a street vibe as you can get, and then capitalize on urban authenticity. Okay, so here we are in this 9-block area. You look at the center here, Dave Hall, a very tired Dave Hall Plaza. And when we first started this conversation 4 years ago, Dave and I talked about the park really being an important leverage piece to catalyze, and we had some people look at it cross-eyed and actually asked us to ballpark a number, and I think that number was $5 million, which is where we're at right now. And thinking about where you had the highest concentration of vacant and abandoned buildings, what can you use as a catalyst here to help transform that? The Levitt Pavilion, I'm not going to go into detail here other than we're the 8th city of probably 20 cities where Levitt's making a commitment in the country. It's 50 free concerts a year, and these are what I would describe as real local music, and these are not national acts. Okay, looking beyond that is what do you do about the streets around it? In this particular case, it's Main Street, 4th Street, 5th Street, and Jefferson Street, because place matters, and it's about the street vibe. So here's a little sketch of Main Street today on a typical day. And I wanted to mention the streetscape project that we have out there right now is now 25 years old, and it's reached the end of its useful life cycle. And any walk down the street, you'll see the deterioration of some of these bricks of that. But applying these principles going forward and integrating them into the projects that both Scott and Dave are going to talk about here are those important components of vibrant frontage, and that's through adaptive reuse and infill construction, activating storefronts and streetscaping. Here's 4th Street, looking west from the Rybold buildings on the left, the arcade is on the right. And again, this is not rocket science. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. And our model for this is not very complex either. It's really fundamentally opening up these areas for significant planting and landscaping, growing great trees, having projecting signs, and again, using activating storefronts and streetscaping. Dave's going to touch a little bit on the arcade. This is the Ludlow Street sketch that we had done to basically express a little bit about the vibrant storefronts and streetscaping. And with all of this, the outcome here is to really catalyze and leverage activity beyond this. And that really means reaching out in all these other directions. And we're beginning to see that. And it's really leveraged around this system of civic investments, which includes the library, which is opening sometime this summer. August 5th. What time? 9 o'clock in the morning? Scott knows. The Levitt Pavilion is at 99% design. This will be out to bid and be under construction by the end of August for completion of late May, early June next year to actually kick off the concert season. Little interesting building here, the historic Grantino Tower, our first mid-century modern office building located at the southeast corner of 4th and Ludlow, is poised for an opportunity. The building was actually entered onto the National Register of Historic Places, and again, this importance of being able to access this capital stack that includes historic tax credits. So that one is poised for opportunity. Scott chatted for a moment about the Center City building, 165 units of rental apartments with active restored street level fire blocks, which Scott is going to run into right behind me, and then Dave is next. So Scott, you're up.
All right, let's see if we can get a PDF to function the same way as a PowerPoint here. Let's see. Give me one moment, folks. Let's see here. That's not helping. Yeah, where's that button at?
You're a Mac guy.
I'm a Mac guy, seriously. Like,
And you go back and do your. Is that it?
you working? Yeah, we'll call that good for now. We'll go through it. So, Fireblocks District. Initially, this started out as me and my business partner, best friend who lives in Utah, buying 2 buildings in Dayton, Ohio. We were excited about the opportunity. It was a pretty straight-cut deal. We were going to do condos, super light lifting relative to what we're currently doing. As we got to know the market more and more and more and got feedback from a number of different folks, talked to these great men that are on the front row here, we realized that there was a much bigger opportunity. That opportunity then turned itself into what is now the Fireblocks District. It's interesting to note that we didn't come up with that name. Let's see if I can get this to... We didn't come up with that name. It was actually as a result of the 1913 floods. So the 2 blocks that we'll see here in a moment were basically flooded, and then they were burned down 6 days later to add insult to injury. And as a consequence, many of these buildings were all constructed with similar methods around the same time frame, within about 5 to 7 years of each other. That makes them very well suited to the adaptive reuses we're doing now. And the different engineering and challenges that we face and encounter with one, we can apply that to the other. And so our cost efficiencies are such that we're able to do certain build-outs and provide certain amenities that some other projects would ill afford. So our little group, I'll spare you the details. There's a bunch of us. We're a team, consortium of different folks that are passionate about redevelopment. We're also passionate about local businesses and regional businesses. We feel like those businesses spin and grow economies. Dayton doesn't have the financial wherewithal to go buy jobs and go compete against other markets in the region or nationally for that matter. You know, NCR left. You know, we've already had some of those things that we've had to deal with. So the best way to do this is to start businesses here. That's a key thing that the arcade is going to be facilitating for this area in this region. So for what our you know, little stake in this and what we feel like we can contribute is we want to be the lifestyle enhancement hub for downtown Dayton. And when you look at the way that we are juxtaposed to the rest of the market, we're kind of in the middle of it. I'm a cyclist, I'm a bike guy. Fire Blocks District's kind of the hub. The rest of it kind of spins around it. We like to be in the middle of things. That's our style. And so we recognize that, you know, that early on that this wasn't just an adaptive reuse for residential, that this was a 500-person plus new jobs project. We were going to take two full square blocks, add 200 new residents as the project got larger and larger, and that we were going to end up spending, combined with what our tenants would spend, et cetera, about $100 million. And with some new construction that we're going to be doing, which we'll see here in a moment, we're talking over 400,000 square feet of developed space between existing and new construction. And so that's 120 residential units, tons of activation on the green space rooftops and stuff, and we'll get into that as well here in a moment. This slide here, let's do this, sorry. There we go, it's kind of in the middle there. I'll spare you like blowing you up with a bunch of numbers. One thing that was really interesting for us when we were trying to talk to our investors, different folks around, we knew that the apartments were full here, right? We're at 97, 98% tenancy. We knew these things. We didn't really understand the financial mechanisms and the drivers behind it. When you look at most market studies, et cetera, you come back with about 860,000 people plus or minus. I've seen 830. You know, average household incomes 44,000. You know, those numbers right there. You can read them as well as I can. So that's not that appealing when you're talking about fixing things that cost $150, $160, $140 a square foot. So when we got into the numbers and really did our own research, we came back with these deeper metrics, which is 45% earn above $62,000 annually, 30% earn above $100,000. Of those, 70% of them have at least a bachelor's degree or higher. Average home values are $315. Average rent is approaching $1,500. When you have those types of numbers, you can do Delco. You can do all these different things because you have a revenue model to support it. I just got a market study back from CBRE out of St. Louis. They're validating my new revenue model at $1.54 a square foot for the Huffman Block building or the David building, and $157 for Elks. So this market is moving quickly. It wasn't that long ago, just a few years ago, that everyone was trying to get above $1 a square foot. Now we're marching up towards that $1.60, $1.75. Once you break the $1.75 per square foot mark, that's when the bigger players will come into this market and it will turn overnight. At least that's what it'll feel like. So again, Scott talked about the units that are in the pipeline. Our whole idea is to keep everybody downtown. We have these wonderful amenities. You know, the Dragon Stadium sold out 1,000+ games. How do we keep those folks down here? How do we keep those dollars spinning? How do we keep them engaged? And we feel like by having, you know, pre-game of, you know, amenities, post-game amenities, et cetera, things for families and everybody in between, I think that makes a lot of sense. These gentlemen touched on, you know, some of the other great things that are happening. And again, if you look, our positioning relative to a lot of these wonderful projects that are happening, both on the lifestyle enhancement side, library side, new jobs, et cetera, we're smack dab in the middle of it all. So I'm going to rip through these buildings pretty quickly. Hopefully it doesn't give you whiplash. Trying to make sure we have enough time for questions at the end. But so here we go. Let's see if I can do this without making you sick. So this is a rendering. We are greening our rooftops everywhere we can. We already have in our budget now because we've been able to bump it up quite a lot. We are going to be greening the top of the Huffman Block building, doing some light greening on Elks, and then you can see some of the other things, and I'll get into those as we go through the building specifically. Huffman building is going to be about 68 units. It is going to be 68 units. There's kind of a rendering of it. I'm going to see if I can back this off a little bit. That's better. So, you know, we can't change much. We don't want to change much. It's a beautiful building. So we're going to be doing 68 modern lofts, 24,000, a little less than that square feet of retail, and we're going to be activating our basement. It should be noted that we are constantly turning people down to rent these spaces. We are waiting to make sure that, we're obviously at a point that makes sense for them in our development and our construction to move them in there. But the interest for downtown, not, for the Fire Blocks District and every other amazing thing that's going on, it's extremely high. Here's one of the basic layouts we're doing. I'm not going to run you through what all the layouts look like in the other buildings, other than to show you this is a common theme. We put a lot of money and time into kitchens and bathrooms and lots of natural lighting. And you got to get really creative in these shotgun style situations whenever you're doing residential to push that natural light through the units. I'll stop on this for a second. The countertop that you see there is actually sourced. We are going to be having those made locally. The concrete sink you see there, we're going to be having those made locally. We're working on getting the shower glass doors made locally, and we will be sourcing all the materials locally. And local for us is with a 300-mile radius. That's our identified region. And so the same thing that we're doing with our materials sourcing, we're doing with our commercial tenant sourcing, if you will, and are working with local and regional F&B groups and retail groups that just shows you how the Huffman Block building fits in. Center of that's basically 3rd Street going east and west, which is north and south on the screen. Elks building, that great little building on the corner. Everyone loves Elks because it has Century Bar in it. Who doesn't like Century Bar? We are working with them to expand. There's been some challenges. There's probably going to be an article coming out soon where we tell everybody what's been going on. But the long and short of it, we had some construction challenges with one of our contractors. We worked through that. Positive side of that is we have a better revenue model for both groups now and a better capital stack for both those groups now. So for Ketty's Candies and for El Sueño. Above those F&B products, we're going to have 22 units. We're putting 2 units in the penthouse. That used to be Dave Hall's house at one point. I guess you could look down on his plaza, kind of be the king. So that's now our working office for the moment before we gut it and turn it into apartments. So you can kind of see the layout there. Again, kitchens, baths. Kimmel building we acquired last year. That's 140 to 146 East 3rd Street. It is catty corner to the new library. We're going to be putting a bike shop in there. We're way down the path and getting that put together, and a local coffee shop and bakery will also reside in there shortly. We'll be making those announcements and who those folks are here very soon. But again, it's about creating a neighborhood environment, one that has at least 12 points of F&B, food and beverage activation, with a lot of retail and other lifestyle enhancement amenities that really create the experiential things that the talent and workforce that we're trying to keep or attract is going to want and demand. 124 is a commercial building. It's staying 100% commercial. The whole first floor is 100% leased. We have great folks in there. We're systematically going through and attracting office tenants to fill out the balance of it. Looking for a 3rd floor tenant to take, just to take the whole floor. We left that open on purpose. For us, this is an extremely long play, and we feel like that's the best approach when tackling this project, and it's the best approach for Dayton as a whole. Anyway, so DP&L building, interesting little guy. I love terracotta facades and architecture. So when this little guy came up on the market last year, I literally had 2 days to decide if I wanted to buy it. I wanted to buy it. I've been talking with the seller or the gentleman who owned it for over a year. He calls me on a Friday and says, you have till Sunday to decide if you want to buy it. I'm like, okay, well, I'm buying it. So we closed on it a couple weeks later. It's a little 13,000 square foot building. We have an F&B group that wants to put a diner in the bottom of it. Each floor is 3,300 square feet. What's interesting about this structure, it has no columns down the middle. It's 33 feet from wall to wall, and it's got a 16-foot ceiling. So it's just a really cool, open, little, unique space in downtown Dayton. We're going to be putting some Airbnb housing options in there. There are not a lot of housing options in that space. If you want Airbnb, there's almost nothing downtown. We want to help solve that. We also want to create flexibility for our tenants that are going to be residing there, that if they want to have a friend, family member, coworker, whatnot, business associate, stay in the neighborhood and stay close to them, they can stay there. So we'll provide that as an amenity for our neighborhood. We acquired Price Stores a couple months ago. We are going to be turning that into a boutique hotel. The first floor is going to stay retail. We are working with Mr. Ed Wimsat to figure out how to help move the Price Stores brand and modeling into this century. And that's great. I love the history of it. It's amazing, and they've done a wonderful job. We just want to help make it a little bit more relevant to the folks that would be patronizing it in the future. The second floor of that structure will be the lobby and the office, and also a bar. And then those next 3 floors, as well as the rooftop, will be dedicated to the boutique hotel. We were planning on doing that ourselves, and I've had an enormous amount of interest. Sorry, just making sure you're paying attention. An enormous amount of interest in that opportunity. I don't even think we're going to do it by ourselves anymore. I think we're going to pass the baton off to somebody else who could do a better job. So Journal Herald building is right next to it. This is on 4th Street. You can see the address on there. Right there across from the old steam power plant and our city parking structure. That has been a club. It's been a music venue. It's going to stay that way. We are just going to be elevating it and updating it. And again, all of these buildings, they're all within this narrowly defined area to create this critical mass where they can all feed and spin and play off each other, right? And so you have the working opportunities, the living opportunities, as well as these lifestyle enhancements. All right, green space. So a lot of people haven't seen this. This was a design challenge. Make sure, okay, let's see if I can finish this up in like 2 minutes. This was a design challenge for us. This parking lot we acquired last year, it's critical for us to have the parking here. We have about 300 spaces that we currently own within the Fire Blocks District are right there. We needed to add more parking options. This parking lot, as we know, is all a wave pool. If you've ever parked there for Century Bar, an event or whatnot, it's not the greatest parking lot in the world. When we've done some testing, we realized that we need to excavate out the whole substrate, fill it back in properly, compact it, and then put a new top on it. It's going to cost me $800,000 to $1 million. Not a whole lot of value there for me. So we kind of went back and we said, okay, went back to the drawing board. What would be a cool high-value thing, and what would be something that would put Dayton on the map in this particular category? And so I was inspired by the Highline Park in New York City. I said, what if we took this parking situation that's kind of a liability and a negative now? What if we went ahead and excavated it all out, leave it out, put parking in the basement, and then let's do parking on the ground level and then do a rooftop. And then we'll make that kind of a public green space amenity for the neighborhood, and we can turn the neighborhood in on itself. My design team came back and said, okay, that was a good first try, but what about this? The interest is so strong, and I've said this before, in first floor activation for what we're doing, we actually don't have enough. I can go through and show you why that is at another time. Come find me. Be happy to share it with you. I have a much longer version of this. But we're adding 48,000 square feet of first floor in this building. So instead, we're doing parking in the basement, commercial on the first floor, another level of parking on the second floor, and then the green space amenity on the top. Another thing that should be noted is we are going to be constructing this structure exactly like these other buildings are. So basically flat concrete floors. The decks will be on the outside. The reason we're doing that is parking's not going to be an issue in 5 to 10 years because of automated cars and all these other things. It's an issue now. I want to be able to repurpose this building to something much more beneficial for the community than just a place to park your car. But it's a necessary thing for right now to deal with. So again, green spaces for us are really important. There's part of our mantra of our organization is 3 points of stability: environmental, social, and economic sustainability. So for us, as much as we can do to green this community and make it feel much more natural, it's a good thing. We're human beings. We like to interact with one another. We like to talk. We like to not be standing on a blacktop or concrete. So these are really important things. The way that we're structuring this, if you look at the top of the 124 building, which is the structure here with the multiple little green spaces up there, our vision, and this may actually get encased in a greenhouse, but is to be able to grow vegetables, herbs, all those things for the F&B within the Fire Blocks District on that roof, and it would be dedicated specifically to that commercial endeavor. This is kind of just some of our inspirations to some of the things that we're doing to activate the central part of our neighborhood. One last thing, let me go back to this slide real quick. I failed to mention that. So by also adding this plaza, we're going to be, hopefully, the city will let us, abandoning this alleyway that goes east and west. That's the bus stop over there. We want to stop that and make the flow of traffic go on to 3rd and 4th Street. And we want to connect the center of 3rd Street here in the FBD to 4th Street and have that north-south be the common corridor and create that plaza. And again, turning the neighborhood back on itself, looking back in on itself. And the other cool thing that happens is the backs of these buildings now become high-value real estate, whereas before it's just the back of a building. Now you can actually activate it and do something that's going to generate tax dollars and provide value for the community. There you go. Thank you very much. I'll leave it up to Dave. See if I can shut that up here.
All right, so I'm going to take you down a little different path. Probably not get into too much design stuff. Really, just an overall look at where we're going with the arcade and what we're doing, but also kind of talk about what's happening as we continue to take people through the arcade, and really just all the inquiries we get. It always seems to me is whenever I tell them I'm working on stuff downtown, the first question out of the mouth is, what's going on with the arcade? So this is a great little video. It was put together by Indigo Media as they were walking through the arcade, what we call one of our underground tours. What's interesting about this and where the arcade was going was potentially in that landfill down the road. And with the vision of the mayor to say, it's time to take on the arcade, take a look at it both from a feasibility perspective, but also what's it going to take it down. And that really started to pivot the conversation about what we're going to do with the arcade. What was interesting about it was we had a lot of people in the room that were part of the task force that said, hey, we thought for sure this was going to come down. And as we went through the conversations, we looked at the adaptive reuse ideas, that whole conversation pivoted. And ironically, the group that we thought were, or the individuals we thought were most interested in tearing it down were the ones that seconded to save it. So when you take that and you start to see what's going on downtown and the importance of structures like this, because this is not a great real estate deal, but it is emotionally important to the city. And it's a pivotal thing that most people say, if this thing can get done, anything can get done downtown. And that's really what we want to tell here about how important this is, because at the end of the day, when we're talking about a building, we're really talking about resetting an ecosystem, an economic ecosystem for what's going to happen. Because while the arcade's a challenge, there's a lot more challenges than just the arcade. It really ties into the need for backfilling that 3 million square feet that John had talked about earlier, about making the streets vibrant that Scott was talking about earlier, how key it is to reset place, create this area where we can get people that want to stay, locate their businesses, and do it. So we're going to use the arcade as going to be this pivot piece, this piece to reset the economic ecosystem. And in order to do that, we really have to kind of buy it down and using the capital stack necessary to really make it happen. So I'll get into the next part. So here's our use program. It's comprised of lots of different things. Ironically, it's very similar to the way it was originally proposed. So in 1902, 1904, it was housing, it was office, it was retail. And in 2017, 18, 19, it's going to be housing, office, retail, but with a little bit modern spin, right? It's really in the same way that it was a central marketplace in 1902, 1904, it's going to be really catalytic, hopefully, for the area around it, and hopefully permeates down Main Street so that we can start to really turn these buildings around. So it's going to consist of 126 affordable and market rate housing units, artist-based. We're going to really tie the whole arts component, because what we're trying to do is create this ecosystems of collisions with disciplines that wouldn't normally be together. So from the artist community to the engineer to the innovators, but all supported by great restaurants, retail, and maybe this whole idea of the incubation of new venues for our walkability in our main streets to really reset our retail spaces in and along the streets of Main Street and 4th Street and 5th Street. Because what makes the south of 3rd Street uninviting is the fact that there's nothing there. If you drive down the streets, it feels one way. If you walk down the streets, it feels different. So, like Creative's Housing Everywhere, our goal is to be a unique product. It's not to have a bunch of drywall boxes. We have 4 buildings that will be surrounding the building, surrounding the rotunda and the arcade, as everybody knows it, that will be part of the Creative's Housing. It'll also have integrated creative spaces, spaces that really support not only the people that live there, but the people that want to work there and innovate there, and also enjoy there. But really, what we're trying to do is with this innovation strategy that Scott had touched on earlier, really taking the ecosystem of the innovation technologies, the tech transfer, commercialization, and really create this hub where the disciplines can all kind of bump up against each other, we call them collisions, and create this unique atmosphere that ultimately will start up new businesses, but also attract new businesses into town, and hopefully backfill many of the office towers that line Main Street today. Sometimes they're paired up with some maker spaces. Interesting story, the square that you see in the upper center of the building, or the slide, is square that was started in a maker space. It was an engineer, an artist, an idea, and a tech guy. And out of a maker space, a tech space, tech shop, they created the square that is currently used today on the iPhones. But what's really one of the key ingredients as we mix all these disciplines together, having an event space that is bar none, spectacular, used a lot, and really creates that opportunity for great collisions. So often we tell this story, Bill Streever from Cross Street Partners, our partner in this project, talks about why GE, located in Boston next to District Hall, because of the public event space that they had created there, and how important it was to really creating a unique atmosphere for their employees. So the Rotunda, ironically, after 30 years of sitting there in a pretty decrepit state, is still in pretty darn good shape. This is not the most recent photo, but it still has a lot of this feel. Our goal here is to have it look something like this in the near future, alive. So when we do our whole space planning or our capital stack and all those things associated with it, we're going to have the first floor as our retail, the second and third floor will be the innovation space, all again to make sure that we have active space in and around the Rotunda. So when you come there, it's not just something that is a little boring. Below that, we're actually going to take the current hole that is in the center of the Rotunda, we're going to fill it in, but below that we're going to put in what we're calling the tank or the theater in the round, something that acts more like a pivot or a pitch place or a Shark Tank to roll out the new ideas created up in the innovation area. The kitchen incubator, which will be integrated into some part of the arcade, is designed to really help us create new venues for Main Street. What we're short on is new venues for Main Street, and ones that are functional and usable, and really create some great restaurants so it becomes part of the walkability. So restaurants, retail, and then ultimately creating sidewalks and cafes that take streetscapes like this, turn them into streetscapes that have some fun and vibrancy, take buildings like this, give them a little bit of life like this, and ultimately take on just great historic buildings. As you can see, what's interesting about the 3rd Street Arcade is the endurance that it's really had, from the flood in the 1913 to its beautiful architecture and when it was originally positioned to the current state that it is right now on the right-hand side. So 3rd Street Arcade, which connects really the north part of really downtown to kind of the south part of downtown, right from Courthouse Square all the way through to 4th Street. And I just did a quick one because we're kind of running behind, but this is our overall goal is to be online and moving forward, complete our funding here in the near future. As we talked about capital stacks, we're looking for every stone that we can really turn over to find all kinds of financing, new market tax credits accompanied with both historic, federal, state are some of the real linchpin pieces. We've also got $22 million in OFA funding for housing. So we're very close. We're not there. We're cautiously optimistic that we'll be there soon and hopes to start construction yet this fall. So what's interesting is you often, when you're walking and touring people through there, they always want to tell your story. So they'd be interested to see what your story is someday. So there you go. Well,
All right, let's give a round of applause for our club. I think you all will agree that Monet, Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Picasso could not have painted a better picture for our future of our downtown Dayton. So with that, let's get some questions. You guys can pop up here real quick. We got a few minutes because Mike, the taskmaster, is going to move us on, and we're going to hear our keynote speaker for this afternoon. So what kind of questions do we have out there? You got to have some good ones. Justin.
Scott Gibson, you talked about the changes in the way that people travel and parking needs, which always seems to be an issue in our communities. Nobody ever thinks there's enough parking, even though they'll park in the Walmart parking lot and walk just as far as they would if they park downtown, right? So talk about how that plays into design and what you think the future's going to look like next 5-10 years.
So based on everything that all of our research and whatnot and the feedback from the folks that we pay a lot of money to help us make good decisions, we feel like there's going to be pressure really for about another 5 to 10 years. And then after that, you're going to start seeing it go a different direction. Also, too, whenever we have folks, when you get that urban mentality, like Tulsa had the same issue 6 years ago, everyone's kind of used to walking almost a quarter mile sometimes. I mean, there is going to be a paradigm shift. We have an abundance of parking. We just don't have an abundance of parking on every corner of every street, right? And we have a wonderful city parking structure that's heavily underutilized, that's starting to get more activated and whatnot. But again, I think we're actually pretty good. I think we have these beautifully wide streets. There are some strategies that we could put parking down the middle possibly, or some angled in parking by the sidewalk. So these are things that are just painting solutions that can be then taken back to something else down the road with very minimal capital investment. But I think we're pretty good overall.
Steve.
Maybe for Dave, or, yeah, probably Dave, is the proposed corporate tax rate that's part of the administration plans going to affect the marketability of the tax credit, the variety of tax credits that are proposed to be real key for a project like this?
So we've already kind of been making adjustments accordingly. I know that some of our funding is definitely concerned about it, and as of right now, we haven't really gotten a read one way or another, obviously, where it's going to go. As things delay, our goal is to just get it done and try to get going as fast as possible. I mean, it could potentially, what else is potentially on the chopping block? It's the historic tax credits, the federal historic tax credits. Is that going to stay? But also much of the concern or the conversation has been about urban redevelopment. So it's kind of like, okay, if we are going to do that, if we are going to cut these taxes, we're going to eliminate these programs, what tools are we going to put in place to take place of that? Don't have an answer for that. We have definitely kept our eyes on it and concerned, but that's about it.
Got another one for John. John loves these kind of questions, I think. In that non-walk area, there's a variety of automotive directions, orientation of streets. So in fact, even on one of them, it goes from one way to two way and maybe back to one way right away. Will there be some standardization of that? Will we see a return to two ways on all the streets in that area?
We will not go backwards. You can only go forwards. I don't think you'll see standardization. It might even get a little bit more gritty. I don't think you'll see any real major wholesale shifts there, but I think everyone here, Scott had mentioned too that we're looking at the possibility of taking some of these angled parking experiments that we've had downtown and actually growing that at a significant level
We're
here.
counting on it.
But the other thing,
those renderings, I had them do those specifically, so I had it on paper. John, that rendering says we're getting angled parking, darn it.
it's been an interesting conversation because any of us will have someone coming up going, we want wide sidewalks, we want cafes, we want protected bike lanes, and we want angled parking, and we want two-way streets, and we want boulevards. I'm not even sure the Parisian boulevards are wide enough to accommodate all of that. So what you have to do when the day is done is think about purpose of place, sense of place, and really finding the happy medium there. But there will not be standardization, and we are not going backwards.
Yeah. But the key to that, though, is so often we have changed. If you look at the way signs were when you're walking down the sidewalks in the early 1920s, 30s, 40s, right, they were pedestrian-oriented. They did a 90-degree turn, went flat with the building because you were keyed in on the car. We're hopefully now going to pull them 90 degrees back, make them more walkable, put in the parking, because the key to the angled parking and the key to the street parking is if we're really going to have a retail or walkability conversation, you got to be able to pull up with a little bit of ease. And being able to have pockets of it really changes the dynamic for a driver using downtown.
Quick question for John. With the new Webster Street Bridge and all the activity at Water Street, what's the future on Deeds Point?
Deeds Point it's owned by the city. It's got an easement controlled by the Miami Conservancy District. And there is a long-term conversation about being able to permit, if possible, construction of housing there. Now, you may or may not know that Deeds Point is actually on landfill from debris from the flood. So it has geotechnical challenges, but as Scott also mentioned, the economics of what's going on with price points for condominiums and rent rates for housing could potentially get the market to a point where it could see its way forward on the developing of that site. And I also wanted to say that the park, everything that's out there in terms of the green space and the park and the connectivity and all of that is staying. That's a permanent piece of Deeds Point. It's basically the stuff behind the street.
Okay, I've been told we can have one more question. It can't be grocery store. One more question. Let it go?
To the right.
Okay.
To the right.
That's
probably the most important question right there.
So with new housing, all this new housing starts looking at sustainability, mixed income housing, aging in place, looking at that. How does that play into the conversation?
I'll take part of that, and you can jump in on that too. We're looking at that. It's hard to make, age in place is key. I get a lot of folks want to be able to buy something, be it on one level, patio home, something like that. So we're looking at doing that. It's going to be new construction though. And everybody else I know that's working on it's going to be some form of new construction because it's the only way to get the price where it needs to be that we've seen so far.
Agreed.
I'll jump in on that for a minute since I'm getting close to aging. And for most of my career, part of my personal drive has been to have this downtown become a place where I'm 70, 80 years old, I can have a vibrant lifestyle, live down here, walk down here, and not be retired to a home on a farm that's isolated from everyone. And I think that's part of the equation that everybody's touching on here in terms of the diversity and the density of housing, because it's not just one part of the market. You want to have you want to have the broadest cross-section of product, price points, and market that you can possibly have to meet this, to basically meet the promise of a city.
Just to say something on the panel, we'll add, no, that's all right. Hurt feelings. I think that empty nester demographic, so the largest age demographic that lives downtown is the millennial 25 to 34. The second highest is this empty nester demographic. And right now, a lot of those folks are renting because they are looking for housing, and a lot of what's available is multi-floor. So I think there is some pent-up demand, certainly for owner-occupied housing for that demographic, single floor. There are a lot of reasons why that hasn't happened yet. The way those tax credits are structured makes those projects difficult to do. But I think as sort of the market starts to continue to pick up, we'll start to see some growth in that area, particularly for empty nesters.